thank you for being with us today. This is a Q&A. I definitely have some questions already queued up, but if you would love to ask a question, either put it in the chat that I'm monitoring or the Q&A that I'm also monitoring at the same time. So I'll be asking questions, kind of being the moderator. Richard, of course, is going to be the main answer of all these questions. Why? Because Richard has 40 some years of nonprofit experience, working with nonprofits, running a development team for a nonprofit. You've basically have done it all, Richard.
It's been a long run. I mean, yeah. It's and it's good to have been in the trenches because when you've actually done the development work, the major gift work, the mid-level work, the organizational work, all that stuff. I often tell people I've had so many failures that it's like, my goodness, we could spend a whole session just on failures. I think everybody would feel better about their lives.
That's actually a good point. We should probably do that sometime, because I did see once there, and I don't know if pre-pandemic, there was a group of fundraisers that would get together every year. I think it was in North Carolina, actually. Mm-hmm. And they would come together and talk about their worst or some of their failures from the past year. And that would just unleash all these things that they did. And it was great because everyone learned from those mistakes. But I think what was so refreshing about it is that we typically don't do anything like that because we don't want to talk about our mistakes or our failures, because we'll either look like we don't know what we're doing, or we look stupid, or it's embarrassing. But
we're conditioned to avoid failure, and from being little tiny people all the way up into our adulthood. And then in the workplaces we go to, failure is actually not tolerated.
That's right.
In our environment, we actually celebrate failure.
Yeah.
Because it's like, how do you find out where you're going and what you're doing if you don't actually fail?
Exactly. Exactly. So if you have a failure you want to put in the chat, we'll talk about it. But let's start out, Richard, with discussing what has been on everyone's mind that I've been reading about on blogs, Chronicle Philanthropy, talking to fundraising leaders, nonprofit leaders, and that's this. There's all this talk about the economy and how it's going to affect the nonprofit community. And we're hearing actually from potential clients that everyone is either thinking of cutting expenses or waiting to hire until the economy is in a better shape. What, in your opinion, what do you feel nonprofit leaders need to be focusing on?
Well, first of all, they should not be thinking about cutting the engine that actually is going to develop the resources.
Yeah.
And I've seen this also in the for-profit world. I mean, 5 years of my career was in the commercial world, and I saw the same dynamic. Okay, we're in trouble. Let's cut sales.
Yeah.
And the very thing that's going to feed your organization is the very thing you should not cut. I think that's the first thing. The second thing, and you and I have talked about this, Jeff, is that yes, it's true that the economy affects a number of people in terms of their giving. That is true. Yeah. But the other thing that's true is that when you approach a donor with something that they actually want to do, they do it. And so that's why we have always experienced in our careers and in our journey in most recent years, Jeff and Veritus, that we actually go past the downturns because we give that kind of advice. If your ask and your messaging to your donor is not aligned to the donor's passions and interests, which I know people get tired of hearing us say that over and over again, passions and interests.
Right.
But if it's not aligned,
Yeah.
then that's where the economic pressure of a person that could be giving changes their mind about giving.
Right.
And so our advice is to basically say, look, keep moving forward, keep understanding what donors want to give to, and service those wants and needs and passions and interests, and it'll be fine. I haven't actually seen where it hasn't been fine.
I was just thinking that, we really started building Veritus right around you were doing your consultancy thing. And then when we rebranded to Veritus, that was like 2009, right in the midst of the,
Right.
the Great Recession. And it was interesting how we saw the energy from clients at that point going, oh, we've got to figure out a new revenue stream. And we haven't really thought about major gifts, and we need some help here.
Mm-hmm.
And so those forward thinking organizations we started working with at that time, who were like, we need help on major gifts, because we realized this is the area that's going to give us the best ROI. And even though we really don't have the money to spend on this, we're going to we actually have some money stored away that we need to do this so that we can hire someone to come in and do this. And we're seeing that with some of the clients here now. Some prospective clients are saying, hey, we've been really heavy direct response oriented, and we now need to focus on mid and major gifts, and we haven't done anything with plan giving. I need to make a case to my board. And so when we do our donor assessment, it's like, oh, for the next 5 years, you could grow from, 10 million to 25 million. And right now you're on a path to go from 10 to 13 million. If you actually focused on mid and majors and plan giving, you could see so much more revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, that's exactly what we need. We need to invest in this now.
I think the key thing is to not turn the investment spigot off to fundraising. I mean, I just was dealing with a situation now where a client, because the revenue is down, is turning down the amount of investment in acquisition.
Yeah.
So at the front end of the pipeline.
Yeah.
And so here we go. You're going to mortgage the future. So I mean, it's keeping focused on the donor and what they want to do in servicing that. It's very, very important.
Yeah. Okay. Next question I have here. For those nonprofits wanting to hire or retain fundraisers, that retain the fundraisers they have, what advice do you have for nonprofit leaders? How do they keep and attract good people?
Well, I think one of the key things is to basically be sure that the person you're hiring, that their motivated abilities are actually going to do the job for you in terms of raising money. Oftentimes, people are hired who are interested in the cause, or they're a relative of a board member or an authority figure, or they came out of some other job or whatever. And I'm always interested in knowing, are you really interested in the cause, first of all? Secondly, do you have the abilities and the motivation to help and serve donors fulfill their passions and interests?
Yeah.
And so we have a whole interview process that we would put people through in terms of, how you decide what attributes and all of that stuff.
Right.
I think once you get them in the door, though, here's why so many major gift plan giving people, mid-level people are leaving, is that the authority figures, the structure doesn't serve those people by giving them fundable projects, administrative support, getting the fundraiser together with program and finance. I mean, actively working that whole agenda. It is amazing to me, Jeff, and we've seen this over the years, that a fundraiser will not succeed unless they have something to present to donors.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that there's so many authority figures that don't understand that.
Yeah.
That you have got to give your fundraisers of all types. It's sort of like hiring somebody to work in your retail store and then not putting any product in the retail store.
Right.
And then telling the person, well, you know what, you're doing a lousy job. Well, there's no product in here, or the product that's here is not selling.
Yeah.
That's a big deal about retention.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, we would keep a lot more people if we could do that.
Exactly.
All right. We are getting the questions coming in, and I really appreciate it. So please keep asking. Let's start with Anna out there. Here's her question. What is the best way to start on a development and marketing strategic plan? Build off data, lessons learned? Do you have any simple templates that you can direct us to?
I do actually. Always start with the data. Always start with the data. In other words, what are the current organization's assets?
Yeah.
And by assets, I mean the donors, the individual donors, the institutional donors. How many do we have? What's their value? What kind of retention is there? What kind of value retention, value attrition? Because that sets the basis for where you are in terms of what you have. I think the next step is basically then determining where you want to go. And if you've done the analysis properly, you can actually project out from that analysis what kind of growth that you want to have. Now, if you don't have the right strategies in place, you're not going to have that growth. But it's basically setting realistic goals and then putting the strategies in place to do that.
Yeah.
We have a whole system of pipeline analysis, which we're going to talk about a little later, as well as just our general analysis that actually lends a whole bunch of information to that whole process. But to keep it really simple, that's how I would start the whole thing.
Okay. Good.
It's way more complex than that, but that's.
And I forget, do we have anything in our free resources around that you know of? Any templates?
Writing strategic plans? I think we do. Yes.
Okay. So you can always go to veritusgroup.com and look in our resources tab, and there should be something in there that could be helpful for you.
I mean, let me just say one other thing,
Yeah.
Anna, about that is do not start with strategies. Like somebody might say, well, we have to do more events next year. No, that is not the place to start. Events is kind of a means, or we've got to do more direct mail, or we've got to do more of this. That's just a means to get somewhere. You have to start with where you are and decide where you want to go, and then start crafting how you're going to get there, the how, the strategy.
Yeah. Okay. This is asked to be confidential. Here's what it says. So many of us in higher ed, fundraising are so tired of being told year after year whether the donors are really ready. Ask them for a big gift to hit our metrics. New MGOs with zero contact with their portfolio are being told they must solicit people that they've never met, not even once. What you talk about with actually getting ongoing gifts and engagement is right on. But the big universities, they want billions more. How do you want to talk? So you want to talk to that? Because we've heard that so many times.
You and I have been around this topic with universities. And believe me, folks, we have talked to some of the big universities in the country and outside the country on this topic. And it's like a disease. I mean, it really is. Like it's not about the donor at all. It's about the money, and it's about metrics and presenting a good face to the management and board.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that statement. We're just as sick of it as you are. And to the people that we can actually talk to and that will listen, that are in authority in those institutions, those educational institutions, where we can make the argument about actually loving the donor and paying attention to the donor and getting to know the donor instead of just rushing in and reaching into their pocket.
Yeah.
We've seen some really great results, some fantastic results.
We have.
And so it's almost like we need to have a partner in these places to institute our philosophy and our program. Otherwise, the whole same paradigm just keeps going
does
over
not
and over
work.
again.
And I would say, wouldn't you say this, Richard? Universities are the worst.
They are.
They are all about going after the money. They
And
are
metrics.
not about building relationships.
Mhm.
You know, they give these poor MGOs, 300 donors, go raise 5 million. At least that's what, our research department says you should be able to make from those 300 donors. And then how they manage everyone is through these crazy metrics.
Right.
Like
number of face-to-face.
Yeah, 30 face-to-face a month. So all the MGOs are scrambling at the end of the month to try to get a meeting with anybody just so they can hit a metric that really doesn't matter, because was it even meaningful? No.
Well, here's the other problem is in the education thing is like, so now prior to becoming an alumni, the person is over in the student side of things.
Yeah.
Here they are over here. No one talks to them about philanthropy, about education, the value of education, the value of this course in that mode.
Right.
The minute they graduate and move over to alumni status, now they suddenly and magically become a target for income.
Yeah.
And we've designed a system which has been very hard to get people going on this in the educational institutions, that actually marries the two, the student services thing with the alumni thing.
Yeah.
So that there's a transition across that divide, graduation.
Yeah.
And these alumni are treated with the respect and honor that they want to have. I remember one guy, and if I said the university, everybody on this call would know exactly what we were talking about. But it's like, was really upset, a very successful now attorney on the East Coast, who said, "Yeah, I graduated from XYZ education institution," and suddenly they just pounce on me, and all they want is my money.
Yeah, and
it makes me really upset. And that's the story of, unfortunately, of a lot of these kinds of people. And it's very sad.
Yeah. And it's been interesting. We've worked with a number of universities. Every one of those, Richard, when we put into that's donor-centered, relationship-based, finding out the passions and interests of the donor, the revenue has taken off.
Goes nuts.
Now, it wasn't immediate, but it took 12, 18 months. But they saw so much more revenue coming in. The fundraisers were happy because now they had goals that were reasonable. It was like completely night and day.
Yeah.
So
it's very sad.
Anyway, here's another one from Nicole. Here's what she asked. My org has decided to merge the communications and fundraising departments and let go of head of fundraising and the head of communications to replace with one new head of the merge department that will start recruitment this month. Any tips or recommendations for how to move forward in this situation? Because Nicole heads the major gifts, mid-level, and planned giving. Any tips or recommendations on moving forward with the head of fundraising?
Well, I'd want to ask a question first. Is the new head of fundraising a competent fundraising professional?
It doesn't look like that person is yet there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because that would be because I actually like the idea of merging it all into one.
Okay.
You can do it the other way, but the critical piece is that person that comes into head of fundraising needs to be a proven commodity in terms of fundraising, not marketing, not communications, but fundraising.
Right.
So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be to actually be sure that the way, and I don't know if Nicole can influence this, but to be sure that the way they're influencing how things are structured and how things are processed inside the new organization
Right.
is for it to be a mirror image or mimic the donor pipeline, in that
Yeah.
you've got acquisition of donors, individual and institutional, and then you've got the whole qualification to the general file, and then mid-level and major and so on.
Okay.
Which is what's so important in making the thing work.
Yeah.
We find so many organizations that's whose structure is actually fighting the journey the journey the donor naturally makes through the donor pipeline.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work.
Yep.
The other thing I like about that idea, Nicole, is that in that situation, then the communications people are hopefully going to be communications professional that understand fundraising.
They have to.
Not just communications people.
Right.
There's a difference.
Now, that's interesting you just said that, because Trish in the chat said they had merged just like that, but they broke it back apart because the head was a marketing person, not a fundraising person.
That's a problem.
And it was a bust.
Yeah, you don't do that. I mean,
Yeah.
if that's what happens in Nicole's situation, you might as well start looking for another job.
Exactly.
It's not going to work. It's just
Now,
not going to work. And by the way, and we're not down on marketing. Love marketing.
Yeah.
It has a different place.
Exactly. Now, the second part, this is something she'll need some help with. She said, do you have any tips or recommendations on moving forward with the former head of fundraising's major donor portfolio now that she's not there? So the head of fundraising is gone. She was there 10 years. What do you do with that portfolio?
Well, hopefully, is she gone already?
Yeah,
she is.
Looks like.
Okay. Well, I wish that this had been addressed prior to her going, because then the transition would have been an introduction by her to the new person or the new people handling the portfolio. And I'm going for these reasons, and so and so is going to be taking over that whole transition thing. Now it's a little more difficult because you've got to actually explain where this person went and why there's somebody new. And so you've got to explain that. And our advice is always to be very transparent about that. So let's just say that person's name was Kathy.
Yeah.
She's gone, and you try to put the best face on that. Hopefully there is one. And then you're talking about, and so in the future, you're going to be relating to Paul or Mary or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of get on with it. But you have to actually address it with each of those qualified donors.
Okay, good. I have a question from Heather here. I'm officially launching our mid-level program July 1.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Only about 20% of my time will be dedicated to the mid-level donors the first year. We have more donors that meet criteria. How do I determine which donors rise to the top?
Well, you should answer that question because you have actually more experience than I do on the mid-level stuff.
Yeah. So on a mid-level program, on average, you're going to have around, at the most you could have is about 600 donors in that program for one full-time person. So you have 20% of your time. So that's 1/5 of that. What is that? That's like 120,
120, something like
125,
130.
So that's the most you could have and actually really work with them. You have to tier them A, B, and C level. And how do you determine which donors rise to the top of that? Quite simply, you're looking at donors who have, by their giving levels and recency. So obviously in your mid-level, whatever that criteria is for you, you're going to be looking at your top donors, what they've given in this year or last 6 months, and then keep going back, like a couple of years, and then just keep going down the road till you get to your 160. So it's really a simple way to do that. Another way, also is to look at, in addition to recency, frequency, and how much they're giving, is look at if you have any wealth information about those donors. That could also help you determine who is your A-level people. So giving, recency, then also how much have they given over the years? Those are all factors to look at for who should you focus on first.
Yeah, recency and amount are pretty big factors.
Yeah.
In terms of moving that.
Yep. Okay, another question here. If donors have a DAF and family foundation, then the bad economy should not impact their giving, right?
You would think so, unless the DAF is, I mean, it's probably in an investment portfolio, right, which may be affected by market conditions, which may affect how they decide to parse it out if the market's affecting it.
You know, the interesting thing about DAFs, first of all, they've already given it, right? So it's sitting there, just sitting there,
earning interest, hopefully.
Yeah, and then but nonprofits get all upset that they're giving to these DAFs. But you and I have talked about this. It's really up to us, the organizations, the fundraisers, the people who are on their portfolios, to give them something inspiring to give to.
Exactly.
If the donor had something inspiring to give to that they were passionate about, they wouldn't plunk a bunch of money into a DAF. They would give it away, right?
Well, and you could actually take that further, Jeff. If we actually told the donor something that they're interested in and they were inspired by it, they might direct their DAF managers to give you some of the DAF money.
That's right.
So the emphasis needs to be on what we do with the donor, not anything else. But that's true of everything that we're saying, Jeff. It's all about our relationship to the donor and serving the passions and interests of the donor. And the theme that we always are dealing with is that it takes so much effort to serve a donor's passions and interests, to uncover that and serve it. And so therefore I don't have the time to do it, but then I'm going to complain that I didn't get the donor to give any money.
Right.
That is not logical. That is not logical.
Now, this is interesting. I was talking to a financial planner a couple of weeks ago, and his company have DAFs. His clients put a bunch of money in DAFs. And I said, so what do you notice about that? He said, you would not believe how many donors don't even remember that they've put money into a DAF, that they even have it. So he said, if I were a nonprofit, if I had donors, I would say, do you have a DAF? And if you do, how much is in there? Basically get them to at least remember that they even have a DAF in the first place. But then he was saying exactly what we've just been saying. If there was something that the donor actually cared about, they would release the money.
They would release the money. So that's the emphasis. That's where it's got to go. By the way, a DAF is a donor advised fund. It's where donors put money. I mean, it's more complicated than this, but it's sort of like a savings account that they handed over to somebody to manage. But that's the point. The emphasis here is basically on what you who are on this webinar, what you are doing with the donor, not on what the donor doesn't do. Yeah. Because the donor is not doing something because we are not doing the right things with the donor. That's the point. Yes. That's the point.
Brad in the chat said he struggles with the idea of DAFs because the people who benefit are the fiduciaries. And that's true. And except let's make the DAFs obsolete by inspiring donors and actually developing relationships.
Yeah.
So here's a question from Gary. What suggestions do you have to give to financial resource development directors to build up their confidence to help change the organization's culture to become more donor-centric versus just bottom line?
Well, the best way to make that happen, and this is going to sound self-serving, but just hear me out, is to do our value attrition analysis on your file. Because or if you know how to do it yourself, then do it, because we don't need to be involved. I mean, that doesn't matter to me personally, nor does it to Jeff. But here's the thing: most nonprofit leaders, most nonprofit managers have no idea how much money they're losing due to the neglect and mistreatment of donors. They have no idea. And you remember, Jeff, when we did that analysis for a West Coast organization, where out of the 66,000 donors who had given 1,000 cum or more, 66,000 donors, out of that cohort of donors, just that cohort, which is large, they'd lost $148 million. While the bottom line of the organization was growing by 6%.
Yeah.
So they're all sitting back and saying to themselves, well, we're growing 6%. We're doing a great job. Give me a bunch of attaboys. And then boom, here we come with, well, look at this, 148 out the door.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that absent doing the analysis, but the reality is that most nonprofits, and this is a worldwide phenomenon, this is not some cultural piece for the US or Canada. It's happening in Australia. It's happening in Hong Kong. It's happening in all of these places, everywhere we go in Europe, where because we are not treating the donor as a partner in fundraising, the donor is actually feeling neglected, and abused might be too strong a word, but neglected. And so they go away with their donor, with their money, and give it to somebody else, and the charity's losing out on the money.
Yeah.
If you can convince an authority figure and show them data related to that, it changes the whole thing. I mean, it's a radical transformation.
It is.
Why? Because they care about the money.
Right. Here's a good question from Joyce. If leadership believes that we have donor fatigue, how can we ascertain if that is true? And what should we do in terms of fundraising?
Well, I wrote a blog recently on donor fatigue.
Yeah.
And so if you look that up on our website, it has some good points in it. But basically, donor fatigue to Jeff and myself and our team is the whole concept is basically a myth.
Exactly.
To us. Actually, it's a better name for, or a better label for what's happening to the donor that is being labeled donor fatigue, is that we're mistreating the donor and they're just going away, and they're tired of the chatter from us and the way they're being treated. That's what's really going on.
Yeah.
So they're tired of the treatment. You're not listening to me. You don't know what I care about. You keep sending me the wrong things. You don't tell me my gift has made a difference. You correct all of that, and it's a whole different game. It's not about being tired of giving. It's being tired of the treatment they're receiving.
That's right. I love that. Okay, here's a question. Any tips on pushing back on leadership, wanting to see new foundation and major donor funding, external prospects via board or foundation prospecting versus our limited staff time to work our mid-level and major donor caseloads?
Well, with foundations, you do have to go out and find those foundations that match your organization. I mean, so that is more of a quote prospecting thing. Yeah. But the word prospecting for anything else, for individual donors, is a dirty word for Jeff and myself and our team. Why? Because you shouldn't be going outside the organization to find major gift prospects. because those donors are already in the qualifying process inside your organization.
Right.
So look there for the donors because they've already voted with their pocketbook all the way back when you acquired them.
Yeah.
Said yes when they gave the first $5, $15, $20, or whatever they did. And then they continued to say yes as they kept giving. And they continued to say yes as they moved into mid-level. And as you move them up into major gifts, that's where you get those donors. It is a complete waste of time to follow up donors that some board member has come up with, in our opinion and in our experience. And there are exceptions, but there are very few that don't actually make it justifiable to do the exercise. So it's a waste of time and effort to be doing that kind of thing. And we have seen that so often where an authority figure takes them, say, a major gift officer and says, essentially, you don't want to waste your time with these people.
Right.
Why don't you go talk to these 3 rich people over here that are going to Kiwanis or Rotary? And why don't you come and we'll introduce you to them? And so they spend, 1,000 years doing that. And in the meantime, neglect the very donors who actually love us and want to do something for us.
Yeah.
It is just so abusive, Jeff. It gets me really wound up.
I know. From discovery to solicitation, a healthy timeline to develop donors is about 18 months to creating a winning partnership with a donor, right?
Could be.
Yeah,
It could be. We've seen that happen in 4 months.
Yeah.
Sometimes a donor comes in and gives money, and if they're treated properly and they're given the proper information, in about 30 days, 2 months, it's like, well, I'm in. I trust you. It's all about how you treat them.
Yeah.
And see, this theme of treatment is such a consistent theme with us. It's about honoring. It's about respect. It's about serving them. And you all that are on this webinar today, just think about this in terms of your own personal journey with somebody. Like, for instance, in my relationship to Jeff, he treats me with respect. He listens to me. He answers my calls. If I ask a question, he responds to me. He talks to me. If I'm afraid about something, he consoles me. We have a relationship, and it's a mutual relationship that runs deep. If you have that kind of relationship with a donor, which obviously you can't get to a certain level of intimacy because it would be wrong, but or inappropriate or non-professional. But if you have that kind of relationship, that donor is going to respond to you pretty quickly and in a whole different way.
Yeah.
Especially if you stop this exercise of starting to talk to the donor and have your hand in their purse already and in their wallet.
Yeah.
That feels so abusive, which is why they keep you at arm's length.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's.
Yeah. And when you say, like, overall, we always say to client, if you're starting a major gift program, you really have to, in your head, say it's going to really start to ramp up 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
It's going to take that long.
It's
not going to be overnight. Now, within all of that, there's, like you said, some donors might give right away. Some donors might be, want to engage that quickly. But in general, it doesn't happen that quickly. It takes time to build those relationships, which is why we're always saying, if you're a leader on this call, you really can help your team. But biggest thing you could do is just have in your head that this thing is going to take a couple of years. And what am I going to do to help those fundraisers in every way that I can to be successful?
Yeah, it's best to set the thing for 18 months to 2 years, but then to operate differently with various donors on there.
Yeah. Here's a question. Would you suggest it's a good idea to pause all acquisition events and focus 1 year of the strategic plan on stewardship and cultivations of donors currently in the database?
No. No, and here's the reason. You have to keep the acquisition thing going. You absolutely have to. And the reason is because it's from those acquisition efforts that you get the bulk of the donors moving in through the pipeline.
Yes.
We've done analysis like this of where you have too much acquisition. You remember that one?
Yeah.
Where there's like 22,000 people sitting at the front door, having been acquired.
Yeah.
And not enough infrastructure to actually manage them through the pipeline.
Right.
And then we've seen the reverse where you have 0 or 120 people at the front door.
Yeah.
And a huge infrastructure, and it's just starving for people
Right.
to talk to. And that's bad. So either direction is bad. It's got to be balanced. But no, do not turn off the acquisition functions. Those are so critical. It's like eating. You wouldn't just stop eating and expect to be healthy.
I know. We know those organizations that have done that, and then they realize a couple of years later, oh, we shouldn't have done that, or 1 year even.
It takes
We
1 year,
done
you'll
that,
be in
and
trouble.
it takes 2 or 3 to get it back to where they need it to be to kind of feed that pipeline. And so you can't. I forget who told me this. You got to keep feeding the alligator, or the alligator is going to eat you. That's the alligator.
Well, that's a comforting analogy. I mean, the basic thing is if you don't have acquisition, you are in for a world of hurt in year 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
In your organization, it's going to suffer significantly, financially significantly, if you don't take care of that.
Okay, here's a question. Any thoughts on how to better explain the importance of individual donors versus grant slash corporate giving? We have a few donors, board members who are always asking, why don't we emphasize grant funding and corporations more?
Well, I mean, you and I, Jeff, would basically say to that one is that it'd be good to have a balanced portfolio in your organization. So we wouldn't say institutional donors versus individual donors. We would say have a balance between the two. So like a balanced resource acquisition function has a whole group of individual donors. And then in the institutional side, it might have government, foundations, corporations, businesses, and places of worship, social clubs, and things like that. But the economics of all of that will actually drive where you put the effort. So if you're finding that there's a great deal of return on the individual side, doesn't mean you're going to turn off the institutional side, but you're going to actually bias in that direction. It has to be balanced. But I wouldn't just say carte blanche, like, well, don't do the institutional side. I don't think that's a wise thing either.
Yeah. I mean, overall, we know that the vast majority of giving comes from individuals, and a small percentage overall comes from grants and corporate giving. That's overall. But as Richard said, having a balance there is important. So it's not like one or the other. And if you're the only one working on this whole thing, then I can see your conundrum, because you're trying to figure out, where do I balance my time?
Right.
Here's one. I've inherited a donor who stopped paying his major gift pledge because he felt ignored by past staff. He took the meeting with me, which I considered a plus, and he told me over lunch how badly they've been treated. I got to apologize and get into his good graces somehow. He told me he'd like to hear from me quarterly. Do you have any ideas for the best way to communicate with him?
First of all, I wouldn't obey the quarterly thing. I would actually do more than quarterly. And what I mean by that, and I'm not talking about an obnoxious amount of contact, but I'm talking about finding out what he's interested in and what he cares about, and then feeding him information, not asks, just information about how great a difference his giving is making in those areas.
Yeah.
It could be a little short one-pager story. It could be a little video you do on your iPhone,
Yep.
where you say, "Boy, I just heard this thing, and Bill, I just wanted you to know this." Send that as little touch points, and then do the quarterly thing as well as reach out to him and visit him. That goes a long ways to basically telling the donor that you're valued, you're remembered, you are significant, etc.
Yeah. I think also here is because they said, what's the best ideas for communicating? Ask him, ask the donor, how do you want to be communicated with?
Exactly. They have their preferences.
Yeah. So that should be the follow-up by saying, hey, I'd love for you to connect with me quarterly. Great. Well, what's the best way for me to do that with you, donor? And they could say, whatever they say, they could be like, well, I want to meet with you at lunch once a quarter. Okay, we'll do that. Or you know what? The best thing is just text me. Just tell me what's going on. Send it through my text. Then I read it. But that is also part of what should be part of your overall strategic plan with your donors. You should know for every one of the donors in your portfolio, how they like to be communicated with.
Exactly.
It's so important because that's honoring them. They're telling you, hey, this is what I like. Richard, you have these horror stories about people wanting to talk with you about your give, and you're saying, I don't want to meet, just email me, and all they want to do is meet with you. It's like They totally ignore you.
Or they totally ignore the communication preference that I gave.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say about that too is at that time when he says I want to meet quarterly, then you agree with, like Jeff said, to what you want to agree with, and then you also say, hey, every once in a while, because I know you're interested in X in the organization, and every once in a while there'll be a story or something that comes up. Do you mind if I just send that to you?
Yeah.
No, not at all. I wouldn't mind at all. So you've gotten permission, and then you send it. This is a theme that I've been hearing about so often these days, like even in foundations work and corporate work.
Yeah.
Where the foundation's the insider foundation person or the insider corporate person tells the person as a fundraising person in the organization, now you need to give us a report every 6 months. And they do that in that serious formal tone.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're going to wait 6 months.
Yeah.
Send some other stuff along the way. Don't just obey that whole thing. I mean, and again, you've got to be sensitive, but these are human beings. They are interested in these various things. And so talk to them a little more frequently and ask for permission to do that as well. I know you want the formal thing in 6 months, but hey,
right.
There's some things that pop up that is going to be really, really good that I'd like to be able to send you.
Yep. Okay, here's one from Anne. She says, how do you determine if my org should stop spending money on acquisition? Well, we know that don't, versus spending that same money on better stewarding existing donors so that they don't lapse or decrease their giving. We are an org working with Veritus on our mid-level program. And we continually grow our bottom line by 5 to 10% each year and continue to grow the number of donors too. But I still think we should be spending our money I think we could be spending our money in the wrong place. Well,
we've addressed that.
Sure, I think you need to contact Richard seriously. And this is where he could come in and look at what is actually happening overall with the structure, how you're allocating your budget, because you can't stop acquisition, like you said, Richard.
You can't do it.
But we don't know what the ratios are here for organization.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like this other organization that we were talking about earlier. Sometimes the organization puts too much into acquisition. In fact, you remember the one organization recently where I said to the CEO, you need to move $3 million from acquisition over to cultivation and stewardship.
Right.
And it was like, what?
Yeah.
Why? Well, because you've got too many donors coming in the front.
Yeah.
And you've got too much money over there.
There was too much volume to cultivate. They didn't have
and they weren't
resources
taking
or the
care of they
people
weren't
or
taking
anything.
care of the donors either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Here's one. Richard, your comment concerning relationship fundraising resonates with me and other professionals. Would you express the same statement to lay leadership that the word is relationship fundraising is critical?
well, yeah, of course. I mean, why would I'm trying to understand the question. Why would we say something different to the lay leadership?
I don't know.
So perhaps you could clarify what you mean by that question.
Okay. Might have time for that. Okay, another one. I'm in the middle of a comprehensive capital campaign for a new organization I'm at. Fundraising is done in the US for giving economic uplift in rural communities in India. We're trying to raise unrestricted funds. And for that, I've come up with levels of giving for naming opportunities for a building that are constructing to serve as headquarters for the life transforming work we do. So he lists all the stuff that they do, and it's pretty cool stuff. I have set up 5 levels of giving with multi-year support requests from about 100,000 to 2.5 million. What do you think of this approach? And how long after building is made can I get the naming done before it becomes uninteresting to donors? I would love to hear your response.
Well, that's a fairly complex one that'd be difficult to respond to on this call, but it's
yeah.
I'm just trying to think how to approach that, Jeff, and whether we ought to do that offline with this person, because it's like
yeah. Instead of all, my first thought is instead of multi-tiers, 5 tiers of giving, instead take all the things that are making up this campaign, all the projects and programs, figure out what each one of them costs, and use those as your offers within the campaign. In other words, you don't need to say, well, if you hit this level of giving, you're now you can now name something. Rather, figure out what the donor's passions and interests are as it relates to all these things. You talked about agriculture, micro entrepreneurship, all these different things that you have that make up your campaign. Focus on those things versus tiers of giving, because tiers of giving is more transactional to me. Where transformational could come from matching those passions and interests with a specific project that the donor actually cares about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yep.
All right. We have just a few more minutes. Man, this went fast. I'm really interested, Richard. So I'm going to ask you a question here about you personally, because I think it's always good to get some good stuff. So you've now been in a transition at Veritus from us as partners, and now moving out of the daily day-to-day work of Veritus and operations. What have you learned about yourself in this transition? Because I know there might be some people in transition as well. What have you learned about yourself in this time?
Well, it's interesting because the whole thing about transitioning leadership, and some of you may be in that kind of situation where your leader needs to transition or is transitioning.
Yeah.
And to understand what the dynamics are in that situation are very important.
Yeah.
And here's what it boils down to in my analysis and my own personal journey.
Yeah.
It's about issues related to control and issues related to significance. What always happens to people like us people that our founders and leaders and stuff like that. And it'll happen to you too, Jeff. And I'm certain it'll happen to many of you that are on this call, is as you move out, you have to deal with the issue of you are no longer in control. And Jeff, you and I have seen, in fact, there's one particular situation that we're highly aware of, where the founder just cannot give up control.
Right.
And so they run through a bunch of CEOs, and they run through a whole bunch of really top executives because he doesn't give up control. But dealing with that whole issue of control, that in fact it's the very thing that you gave your life to was so important to you.
Yeah.
And you want people to have a good memory of you. The best thing you can do is give up control so that it actually goes to a place that's better, because it will be. And there'll be good memories of you rather than this nuisance of guy that you could hardly get rid of.
Right.
So the control thing, and I've got a whole bunch of other stuff related to that, is a big one. The second thing that's big is significance. Why is it people have trouble giving up control? Is because they can't deal with the reduction of significance.
Yeah.
And, Jeff, you and I have talked about that in terms of my personal journey. And you've been very good at dealing with me in terms of allowing a careful transition of moving from a place of significance to a different place of significance, not lesser significance.
Right.
But being able to talk about that out loud, is such a critical thing. So those are two things. I think that the other thing is developing what a leader needs. Why do leaders hold on to power? The reason they hold on to power is because they have no other purpose but the one that they currently have. So you have to have some other purpose.
That's
right. So clarifying a purpose different from the one you have allows you to be significant with that purpose and allows you to release control. I think those are the lessons that I've learned.
That's good.
And they're huge. They're huge in terms of, how many people have we talked to recently who are in transitions, either not willing to do a transition or are in them, and they can't grasp the three things I just said?
Yes, absolutely. They can't let go. They can't let go of control. And they don't know, they cannot deal with the fact that their significance within that entity is going to change.
Right. And you have to transition.
And or you're like you just said, they don't have anything else out there. Like everything was put into this basket. So when that basket changes, they're wandering around, and then that's when they do stupid things. Well, and that's why, that's why you see CEOs of nonprofits leaving from these founder organizations, because
we have a number of those situations. So what I'm saying about that is if you have any leaders in transition or the needing to be in transition, we can be of help. I can personally be of help because I know how to do it. So please. And it's a very personal, intimate thing, and it's very emotional. So it's like people don't know how to handle that.
Well, all right, we did this.
It's been fun. We should do it more often. It really has.
I want to thank all the people that wrote in, or great questions from folks.
Yeah, nice.
Great comments. Really appreciate it. We're going to continue to do these because I think they're meaningful, and we're talking about important things in the nonprofit space. And I want to thank you for that. So, Richard, thanks for all your great advice. And folks, we'll see you in a couple months, probably doing another one of these.